Good morning. So today we're going to talk about emotional processing and frequency. And basically what I'm going to introduce over these next few videos is I want to talk about this idea. A lot of people talk about timelines and a lot of this weird quantum stuff. This idea of we exist in multiple places as one, and as a result of that, we can basically decide which kind of life we're going to observe, kind of like a superposition in quantum physics, right? And as true as all that may be, I want to kind of conceptualize it in a way that makes it less abstract. It's still abstract in the sense that it's not concrete, but it'll give you a guide that you can use that's applicable in your life. And so why is this important? Because when we understand how to emotionally process and what stage we're going through, we can kind of understand the lessons that we need to internalize and integrate and then move forward to the next phase of our life. Oftentimes, people will get stuck. I know that I've been stuck when I'm not able to actively identify what stage I'm in terms of my own development emotionally. And then as a result of that, in spite of everything that I do internally, I just seem to stay in the same place because I'm not internalizing the lessons there. And so there's two fundamental frameworks that I want to introduce to you. And these are 6 degree. So 6 degree meaning that there's 12 steps, right? And that they're based in those 12 laws. And the first one I want to talk to you guys is about the hero's journey, right? This is the first one that's really important. Now, the hero's journey is interesting because it is cyclical, meaning it's just a giant cycle, right? And so the hero's journey has 12 parts. That's about right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He did it. Sweet. And this journey is really essential to understanding our own personal development and the level we go through. Now, when I talk about frequency is how well and how often do I move through this journey. Because what I mean when I say that is that there's some people who you might say are lower frequency. This getting from point 1 to point 4 might be 40 years of their life. While some people moving from 1 to 4 might be 1 week. And if you say, what do you mean? There's that much of a difference? Yeah, that's why there are some people who can seem to obtain results and make emotional leaps very rapidly versus others. You feel like, man, this guy's never going to change. It's not that he's not going to change. It's that their timeline in which their change is going to take might take 40 years. Well, some people, their timeline, their ability to forgive, their ability to move through that will take a week, right? But this is not just stable all the way through, because this person might take 1 week to get through here, but they might take 40 years to get through here, because this is where they struggle, this section of it, right? Whereas this other person might struggle for a really long time through here and then get through the rest of it maybe in a matter of 4 months. Because we all have different timelines, right? And this is why it's important not to judge. And so you might say, well, what specifically are each of these steps, right? And that's what we're going to get into. But the idea is frequency is our capacity or our ability to advance the story. And that our story is oftentimes, it's an emotional one. There's obviously an intellectual capacity to it as well. But more often than not, actually all the time, right? The journey is an emotional one. And then as we take ourselves along these emotional journeys, we advance and we grow And then things around us reflect that aspect and that part of the journey, right? So there might be some parts of the journey you overly identify with, and that's why you get stuck in those parts of the journey. And because of this, you feel very low frequency, which, is related to those higher density feelings like shame, guilt, anger, frustration, because you're over identifying with a difficult part of the story or a singular part of the story. And so your frequency will then reflect your vibration, and your vibration reflects in your feelings. Okay, so there's that journey. Now let's talk about what the actual stages are, right? Because now that we understand this concept that basically I can get stuck or move in certain parts of the journey faster than others, well, what part of the journey am I in, right? And if I'm stuck here, how do I get out of it? And the idea is you have to advance to the next part. So let's talk about what each of the parts are. So here we have the ordinary world. Ordinary world just means things are in status quo. That means things are stable, things are happy, things are happening. You're out of a routine. A lot of people think staying life and having life within this status quo is the objective, right? Because it happens at the beginning of the journey and also at the end. And so there's this idea that getting to the ordinary world where just you have this new standard or whatever change, like this is just it. Like that's the arrival for them, right? And that's the story. And then after that, here we have the call to adventure. The call to adventure is when, something happens that basically says you need to leave your ordinary world. And so let's say, you're married, have kids, and then you get fired from your job or whatever. Now that getting fired from your job is the call to adventure. But you want to go back to your old job. You don't want to lose that. So you refuse the call. And then from refusing the call, now you're in this journey where you're like, man, I was doing so well and I had it and I just wanted to work out. And then after refusing the call, now we have what's called meeting the mentor. Now, when you meet the mentor, you've basically gone past, it's where someone's pointing you like, hey, this is the new step. This is the new thing that you can go towards. This is the next step of your emotional journey, right? And this is the good step. Now, I can talk about the implications of everything, but I would say most people you meet in the world, I would say 80% of people, this is going back down to that 80-20 rule and that distribution. I would say 80% of the world is in between here. They're between refusing the call and meeting the mentor. That's where most people are. And so when you get past here, this is now for that 20%, because the journey and the road, we can talk about the implications, but the journey and the road is essentially that few people take on the whole journey. Those are the leaders, those are the light bringers, whoever you want to call them. But they have to pave the way for everybody else. And so when you're living this journey and you're watching this, if you can identify with refusing the call, meeting the mentor, moving past that, chances are you're out of that 80%. But most people are refusing the call. They're getting called to adventure. They're being called to a better version of themselves. And they're stuck firmly in not wanting to do it because they don't know who can help them. And so, that's where things come along. And then people just get stuck in the victim story there. And then when you stay super, super long, you then get stuck in the cycle of shame, guilt, because now you've lost the call to adventure, you refuse the call, and that's when our vibrations start dropping down. And so now we want to start moving back up. So this is the whole journey back up, because this is the journey to the bottom of the Hawkins scale. The rest is about what's happening when we go up. So after we meet the mentor, we then go to crossing the threshold. We decide, okay, you know what? There's this adventure, there's this tough thing I need to do. I'm going to go do it. So say you lose your job, but now you need to go build your business. So you're like, I'm going to go build my business. Then after that, you cross the threshold. Then you're in allies, enemies, and trials. Now, allies, enemies, and trials is where you're learning now to be able to discern which is which. You're learning where everything exists in your life, what it really is, right? Because I think before, so if you're in allies, enemies, and trials, that means you're in the part of the story where you're still trying to understand the designation behind everything and what everything means, right? And so you're getting very clear about your definitions so that you know how to interact with this new world. Here, I need to go check, make sure my camera is still working. Good. Because it was having some issues there. I need to make sure it's not having some issues with the lighting. So here is where you're really getting clear about what it is you're dealing with and what's going on, right? And then, let's see, 8 is the ordeal. Okay, and then after that, we are going to have probably the toughest part. We call it the dark night of the soul, where we call it the inner cave. Now, the inner cave is where you retreat into yourself. It's usually a time of isolation. It's usually a time of deep reflection, where you've now just come to see that things aren't as they seem. You're starting seeing that your allies, your enemies, your trials, you start getting real, very clear about who and what is going on. There's no more lies. You can just see clearly now. You can see clearly. And now you have to confront yourself, right? This in the story is, when Luke goes into the literal cave and goes to fight Darth Vader, and when he cuts off when he beats Darth Vader under the mask, he finds himself. If you don't know, that's from episode 5, second movie, Empire Strikes Back, probably the best movie in the entire Star Wars series. And that's when you go and you visit the inner cave. And what this looks like in your inner cave moment. So for me, my inner cave moment I had probably last year, right? Because for a long time, I was really stuck. I over-identified with this one, but we can talk more about that later. But here, you're going over the inner cave, and you're really looking inside and saying, hey, who or what is going on with me, and what do I need to do? So now we have the ordeal. Because now you've been able to see everything for what it is. You're clear on things, what they are. Maybe you realize you're more alone than you thought. Maybe you realize you don't have enemies where you thought they were. Maybe you realize your allies aren't who they thought they were. Whatever. But through going through the inner cave, now you've confronted yourself, and now you're ready to confront the world. But the world is going to meet with resistance. It's going to show you a lot of resistance. Here, let me get rid of this so you guys can see. So you guys, you're just going to be battling now. You're just going to be going through the ordeal. And the ordeal means you're really going to be putting your emotional mettle to the test, because everything you've developed in the inner cave is about living and being true to who you are. Now the ordeal is living through that and finding, where do I fit in this world? I would say I'm firmly in the ordeal right now, for sure. And I've been in the ordeal probably for the last year or so. And a lot of part of the ordeal is you're at the very bottom, right? Because now you've dived deep into your emotions, the shame, the guilt, and you're moving back out of that, right? Because the ordeal is now where your emotions, the journey is going on an upswing, but you're learning how to face that while actually facing the outside world, right? Because you went into the cave and now you're going into the outside world. But what's cool is when you do that, here you have the reward, or what they call the elixir of life. Now, the elixir of life is the reward you get when you overcome the ordeal. and you figure out where you sit, where you come from. It's your break in the action, right? Because the ordeal, what's interesting about the innermost cave is, remember, it's not the bottom of it. When you go into the ordeal, you're displaying courage right now. The ordeal is all about courage. That's the emotion you need to be embodying. And maybe I'm saying it for myself as well, because it's all about courage. It's all about leaving past the anger and the pride of the inner cave with, the shame, the apathy, all the difficult emotions of the allies, enemies, trials. You're leaving all that behind and you're facing courage to move forward. And when you get into the elixir of life, now you're getting into emotions like hope, reasoning, because you're able to move past and you're finally finding some relief, right? And, you're making progress, you're growing. And then, now that we have this one, these ones, I always get them screwed up or whatever. But now on number 10, we have what you would call the resurrection. So the resurrection, obviously you're alluding to the journey of Christ, but also this idea that you're rebirth, you're reborn as a new being, right? You're the new you. Because you've now taken this elixir of life, you've drank it, you come through the veil, pop, and you're this new version of someone, right? And now because you're in this new version, you're now able to fully embody it, you're sitting with it, you're building upon it, and you're knowing who you are. You've mastered these principles, but you not only have mastered these principles, now you got to go take them back out to the way things were, right? Because it's not enough to just go through and master and be like, oh, hey, look at me, I figured it out. Now you have to go serve and put it back. So now we have what's called the way back, or the return. And then when we return, what's interesting about the return is that now you're going back to the allies, enemies, you're going back to everyone and everything. But don't do the return before you've resurrected into the new you, because it's not the same thing. And you have to have the elixir of life. There's a lot of times when I was crossing the threshold, and then I broke through the ordeal and went through the elixir of life, and then I went back to allies, enemies, and trials when I really thought I was on the way of return. This is why it's super important to know where you are, because for a long time, I thought, oh, yeah, I break the ordeal. I had the elixir of life. And it's because I was so focused on what it looked like intellectually that I wasn't focused on where I was emotionally. Because emotionally, I was still very much in the inner cave. But on the outside, it looked like I had crossed the ordeal. So then I thought I was going the way back, when in reality, I just returned back to allies, enemies, and trials. Because I hadn't been clear about what I wasn't clear. And this is why understanding the emotional component is so important. Because when you do understand the emotional component and you do return, what's going to happen is now you're going to be what's called, and this is coming from a different hero's journey, but I prefer this one model. I think it's called the Master of Two Worlds. And when that happens is that now your ordinary world has become extraordinary. And what's cool about that is now that you've restored your old world, you've been able to come back. So for me, when I think of my journey, right? And a lot of this is super important, because when you think of your own journey, it's really important to have the story you're telling yourself whenever you're in a specific part of it. And this is actually one of the most helpful frameworks to understand and to frame the things that are going on in our lives, right? Especially when it comes to the emotions. Because if we understand, okay, I'm here. So right now, I'm in the ordeal, firmly in the ordeal. So if I'm having to consistently display courage, consistently learn and confront myself, then I know within the ordeal, the emotions that I really want to conquer firmly are pride and anger. Because pride and anger will pull me back. They're going to take me back to the inner cave, because the inner cave is where you need to learn to get over pride and anger. And if I don't get over pride and anger in the inner cave, then I'm going to allies, enemies, and trials. And this is where you're going to go through sorrow, fear, grief, because you have to learn to overcome these emotions in order to move past that. So instead of going through the inner ordeal, if I'm learning to be neutral, to use reasoning, to use hope and acceptance, that's where I start getting in. These are the reward of the elixir of life. And when I start stepping in and I can firmly make decisions that handle these emotions, I'll know that. And what's crazy is you go through each stage, you are going to be handed tests. For me, especially as I've been as I've been graduating this, I've had consistently tests of pride and anger, and I consistently have, you could argue, fail. Well, there's no failure, but I've seen that consistently. I get bested by these again and again and again because, yeah, there's a lot of anger. And so moving through that, this has been like, for me, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to move through this ordeal, I have to remember to be neutral. And part of being neutral is accepting that not everything requires a response, and that there's nothing personal, and that not everything is an attack on your being, and that sometimes we're confronted with difficult situations because that's the nature of life, and that's the nature of what we're doing, and that these things aren't as personal or as conscious, especially in others who aren't as conscious as they think, but they serve for your own advancement. And it's important to be mindful of that, because there have been times, I think for me, where I'm struggling a lot with wrath. And so wrath is this idea of justified anger, right? Where someone hurts you, they do something messed up, or there's something unfair, and you're dealing with the anger of that. And I think one of the biggest principles I've had to learn is life is unfair. And recognizing that just because life is unfair doesn't mean that it's not graceful, because just like it can be unfair in the sense that I get more suffering than I'm due, it also means I can get more blessings than I'm due. And that's part of what we're doing is getting on the other side of that, right? That's the elixir I'm looking for, is because the life I want, the life I envision up here, where I'm a master of 2 worlds, and I'm coming back, taking care of the people I love, paying back my debt, being able to support others in their own trials, right? Being able to be a master of these 2 worlds. To be that person, life needs to be unfair, because the reality is that me as an individual, I will never be able to do that on my own and within who I am. So in order to do that, I have to be blessed disproportionately beyond my deserving. So this is where embracing the idea that life is unfair and accepting it is important. And in order to embrace and understand life is unfair, I have to be willing to step on the other side of that. And I've had that. That has been the allies, enemies, and trials, crossing the threshold. I've had a very unfair go at it. But coming to that understanding of, hey, when I was getting crapped on, it was unfair. But when I get blessed, it'll also be unfair, because that's the nature of life. It's based on this idea that the more you have, the more you get. The less you have, the less you have. The more things will be taken away from you. As it was said even in the Bible, right? It's this eternal principle of this spiral. And that spiral is what we're seeing play out here. And that's when we talk about the hero's journey, is what's the narrative you're telling yourself as you move along, right? And if you're not even conscious of your own narrative, man, you probably firmly stuck here, right? Because part of it is when you start understanding where you sit within your own narrative, it's super important to be able to tell your story. So the best part about knowing your story and knowing where you are is because when you can firmly identify which stage I'm at, you understand the trials and the necessities and the things you need to move forward in your story, but you also understand the roadblocks and the deceptions that will hold you back. And when you have that clarity to move forward, you're going to be able to move forward with breath and speed. Now, if you need support in implementing these principles in your own life so you can know how, this is what I do. I'm a personal brand and story coach. I support people in helping them understand their own stories so that they can move on to the stronger basis of their own lives. I also help write books as well, because all of this is part of what makes a good book, which is a reflection of our own psychology and our own development as a human species. So because of that, uh, this is what we see played out in real time. And so if you're wondering, well, how do I use this now that I understand this? Just like the same framework we always do, but instead of identifying the feelings, identify, first step, identify where you are where you are. Simple as that. That's the first thing. Where am I? Identify where you are. Then identify what the next step is and what that looks like for you. So, for instance, for me, in the ordeal, part of it is having courage. I don't really struggle with the courage part, but the thing that I have a difficult time with, because I am moving into the elixir of life, right? Which is acceptance. And for me, it's very much accepting that life is unfair. And so part of that unfairness is accepting, like kind of just what I told you out now, is just accepting that, hey, life is unfair and that things are going to do. So what's the lesson for you? What's the next thing that you need to accept? Where you are at in your journey? What's the emotions you're feeling? And if you're having an difficult time understanding where you are, we'll go to step 0, right? Which is identify how you feel. And that'll tell you. Because I know for me, I oftentimes feel tired. And that is because, I'm still moving out of this neutral zone of fighting and conflict. But it's releasing that, letting that go, surrendering that so that I can move up the scale. And then after this, get reborn into my new me and then do the way back. So we're right there. And what's interesting, what's cool is that when you know this, if you just simply focus on the next part of your journey, right? So if you focus on what is the elixir of life, focusing on the reward, what's cool is then that will pull you forward to the next step. And then when you're on the reward, focus on the resurrection, the new version of you, that now that you have this new thing, you're still the old you, but now you have this thing. So now it's like, okay, well, how do I take this thing and the new me and get reborn into that cycle? And then you think about the way back, like what do I need to go back to? What do I need to reconcile that I learned in step 6 to reconcile and bring it back as I come back to my ordinary world, but now that I'm a master of it. And so this is the good stuff. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Hopefully this will help you understand how the hero's journey supports you in your own development and how all that's relevant. So remember the 3 steps, figure out how you feel, identify where you are in your journey, and then ask yourself, what does the next step look like for you? And then you can use that for what you need. Now, if you guys want to understand where this sits within the Universal Codex, come back for the next video where we talk about how that all fits in with the Hawkins scale. And check out last video where we talk about fear and control and what that looks like as we move and we advance up the scale. Hope all is well. Peace. Take care.